an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It's showtime.
Well, there we go. Look at that. It is the 7th day of June, 2024. This is On the Ledger Ontario Politics Podcast. And yes, there's plenty to talk about. We'll get into the TTC strike, non-strike issue. We'll talk about what's happened on the front benches of Queen's Park. But it's worth noting, in election 2018 here in Ontario. Well, we went to the polls Thursday, June 7th. Voters had their say. It is now officially Ford Nation here in Ontario. Just a quick rewind to today. This day 6 years ago, Keith. It would have been a fairly predictable day, and it was an early evening, as I recall. We knew pretty quickly that Doug Ford was forming the new government, that Kathleen Wynne had survived basically an extinction event almost for the Liberal Party. But here we are 6 years later, and you know, he seems to think he's doing a pretty good job. He's got the largest cabinet in Ontario history, spending more money than anybody has ever spent in provincial history, and he's taken 19 weeks off to pat himself on the back. How's that?
No kidding. As you say, it was an early evening that June the 7th, 6 years ago, and made even earlier by the fact that the new premier or premier-elect did not wait for the old one to concede or anything before he went out and said, I'm the winner. Let's go. It's Ford Nation. So that was the beginning right there of the sign that political norms and everyday behavior was going to be different under this government. And it certainly, especially in the first year, it certainly was. As to your mocking joke that he has now, and it's not a joke, of course, that he has the largest cabinet in Ontario history, which was unveiled yesterday after he adjourned the session for 19 weeks until October 21st. Clearly, he wants to give those new ministers and the ministers in new portfolios some time to get up to speed. But 19 weeks, holy cow, that's an extraordinary amount of time. And it really shocked the opposition. The Liberal House Leader, John Fraser, was taken aback. That's not right. It's just like, he had nothing else to do other than, that's just not right. And he's right, of course. But it, of course, benefits this government to, shake things up. It's at the halfway point of their second mandate, get some new faces in there. Although he left much of the front bench intact. I mean, health, finance, housing, attorney general, trade, environment, labor, they all stayed the same. And the two real big changes were energy and education. I do want to get into that. Just before we do, I just want to get John's take on this. I've heard people talking about, and needless to say, biggest cabinet ever, this 19 weeks off. Does that resonate anywhere with beyond this group sitting around the table right now?
No, I'm going to sit on another bench, and I'm just going to say, damn smart politics. It's not just one term with a big majority. It's two terms with a big majority. People behind the scenes, I mean, in some ways, people will say, look, we want accountability. We want questions in the House. We have so much going on and stuff like that. No, people are not going to be concerned about this. So number one, go ahead, Keith, you got...
Are there no fiscal conservatives left? I mean, this is a premier who's under attack for having the most expensive premier's office.
You've heard what I said. And it's not necessarily on the substance. I want to talk politics for a moment. So number one, I go back to this and say, Bonnie Crombie should have run in Milton and not spend her time in the wilderness, because right now she would have had some time in the House if she'd wanted to pour the resources into it. She would have been able to come back to the House because it's going to be prorogued. I mean, that's going to happen. There'll be a new throne speech. There will be a new approach with an energized cabinet. They will go into the spring and probably pull the plug because they want to be ahead of Poilievre. And when they go in there, I think that's more of a timing issue with the electorate. You don't want to be tired. You listened to them yesterday, and the sharp edge of the stick is the carbon tax. That's it. They're going to take the playbook from Poilievre and they're going to roll through using that. And she's not going to get a chance. I mean, I talked about this last week when we were, when you saw her up in Peterborough. And I mean, there's just a shell of a person there. She's not involved. They've got the biggest war chest that any PC party has ever had. They basically blew the others out of the water. Like, I mean, okay, you're sitting in the corner office and you've got a couple of, astute campaign people who have done the polling and everybody else. What advice would you give to the Premier? Exactly what's being done now. And that is, get these cabinet posts nailed down so they won't jump to Poilievre to run anywhere. Give them the summer. There's a great excuse to go and do that. Bring back Steve Clark. He's a damn fine guy. He's got all kinds of municipalities that he's got contacts with. Put him in the front bench. Shake it up a bit. Give Lecce his door out that he's wanted for a while and give him something different to energize him, give him energy. I mean, it all plays out in a very political way. The only thing that I would suggest at this stage is that there were probably some ministers that should have been taken out as well and moved.
Health.
No, exactly. No, but that was it. That was when I saw the list when it first came out. I was looking for the new health minister, and I thought even Stan Cho or somebody else. I mean, Cho's gone to tourism. He's going to love that. He can. I mean, for goodness sake, I think his riding is adjacent to or part of the Toronto Zoo, so now he can get a pass and go with his family. I mean,
careful now. I thought we were going to have to involve lawyers there. You were getting pretty.
Yeah. But I was looking at the health portfolio. It was interesting on long-term care. We now have a registered nurse who served during the pandemic in that capacity, who may have a different view than some of her predecessors because she was at the front bench there.
I'm sorry, but we had a doctor running that show like a year and a half ago, and it was a shit show. So.
Yeah, now we have someone with a different bedside manner. We'll see what happens. I would say though, to your point, healthcare is an issue, and I think that again it would have been. I don't know. Maybe Mr. Ford is incredibly loyal. Maybe there are things that she is getting done, that the current minister is getting done that we don't understand, or that she's weathering it or whatever. But this kabuki show where you only see every once in a while somebody come out from inside the health ministry and go back in, when it is and will be one of the most controversial and important areas of government. Maybe it is that they just say she's grinding through it and she's got the plan and she's working it through. Just let it, don't change it if it's working. But I think yesterday and the plan ahead, if you were a political person, I think you scored very, very well. And guess what? Bonnie Crombie, painted wagon, still out in the wilderness, not anywhere close. Merritt Stiles taking the microphone yesterday and basically calling the government corrupt. And did you hear it? It was kind of like, you bring it. You want to sue me? Bring it. Then we'll take it to court. And we'll have a court thing and we'll bring out all the information. There she is. So anyways, that's my comment. I just think. Well,
I want to get into the personalities here, but back to the politics for a second, Keith. And the other side of that coin, and John's touched on it already. If we've already said, what would you do to advise the Premier? If you were advising the opposition leaders, Stiles, Crombie, Mike Schreiner, I think what they need to do, they got 19 freaking weeks now to create a ballot question. They're going to have to do that because right now there isn't one. And it doesn't matter about accountability. It doesn't matter about the big spending. There's no ballot question. And unless they're going to grind away and create that, welcome to another 4 years of Ford Nation.
Well, I noticed yesterday that one of the it's a rare thing for to have a bill sponsored by three parties, and it was yesterday the Liberals, the Greens, and the NDP, so the three opposition parties, sponsored a bill to create a specific date. And excuse me, I forget the date, but name it as Person's Day. As long as our opposition parties are focused on this kind of shit, they have lost the plot completely. What is that about? This is your cooperate. Okay, I know there's lots of issues you can cooperate, but let's focus. And as you say, let's define something. Three opposition parties cooperating on Greenbelt stuff, on the Premier's office, Chief of Staff using private emails, on the Premier approving that, on the cost of the Premier's office, on the cost of the cabinet. Why did he need to expand to two new portfolios? Why did agricultural affairs and farming have to be separated into two? He's a 36-member cabinet. Holy cow. As I said before, there are no fiscal conservatives left that at least are somewhat concerned with this, with the PC government running a $9.8 billion deficit and all these things. The cost, the hundreds of millions for the beer store, all these things. It just seems to not land on Teflon, Doug. He seems to be able to just brush each one off or come back. Well, like, the beer store one, the latest one, where the opposition parties thought they had something there. The Premier just come back and the finance minister with, well, our numbers show that we've got this and this going to be. You're just completely wrong. And people aren't going to get into the math debate with the government and the opposition parties. They're just going to go, well, we'll see. And, beer is going to be more expensive in a corner store. Of course it is. But is it going to be cheaper at the big box stores? That'll be interesting to see. But it's not going to be something that's going to defeat a government over. What can you pull? John mentioned last week, make every announcement about housing or the hospital situation, the ERs, all these things. Make them with beer cases in the background. So, they spent $1 billion on this, but here's what you're not getting. Make some sort of ballot question. But right now, if your genius ideas for private members' bills cooperating by three parties is Person's Day, and I'm not even going to ask what that means because I really, quite frankly, don't want to know. We'll just let that slide for now. But
I expect you and I and John would be included in that. That's perhaps. And again, I don't know anything about it either. But so let's go back now to the actual, the moving of the pieces on the board. I am going to suggest that what was even better or more nuanced politics was moving Lecce to energy for two reasons. First, out of all of the people we've talked about over the last 2.5 years, 3 years with this government, I don't think Lecce has ever had to walk out in front of the media, John, and say, I know we said this yesterday, but today we're going to roll that back. Where he has not flip-flopped. He has not had to turn or roll back anything that has been government policy, unlike a number of other key ministers in this government. So to put him in the energy role, I think is a really interesting signal.
I think of almost every minister who has served over the last couple of years, 2 terms in that government. He deserves the scroll and the award and the vacation, like without a doubt, in my mind. I think he probably wanted to go into another portfolio at the end of the first year. He stuck at it. I think he's been a loyal cabinet minister. I think the fact that he got the agreements for arbitration in place and that he managed to settle the landscape down out of all of this is a huge tribute to him for doing that. Okay, so like the waters are calm. Yet another reason, when you don't have to deal with teacher strikes and you don't have to deal with an RCMP investigation that may or may not be in by the spring, that you've got the board clear to do other things. Okay, so guess what? This will be the fall that we don't have a teacher strike. I think, I don't know exactly whether he has been appointed there for something specific or whether he wanted to go there. All I know is it's got to be a breath of fresh air. That guy deserves to take a trip up to the energy circle or the mining circle, or to go down a mine, or to go to a nuclear plant, or do something to get the hell out of the house and just breathe some fresh air. So I think whatever portfolio he is will be effective, but I also know that portfolio is going to be fairly quiet. Can you imagine after being, subjected to the unions and the teachers, and he got the financial literacy piece in place, which is really important. No, I think he did a really good job over the last number of years, and he was rewarded perhaps with a portfolio that he can now, kind of work with different stakeholders and be applauded when he walks into the room and be doing things with his federal counterparts, as opposed to being in the trenches every single day.
Yeah, Keith, I think that the idea that the energy is going to be front and center in the next election, they'll be able to wave the flag and talk about electrification, that whole the connection between, as John says, mining and the need for the grid and the infrastructure. That's going to be front and center. And it's going to be an opportunity for a guy like Lecce to say, and here's the big fancy check that we're investing, where he wasn't able to do that so much in education.
Absolutely. A big part of this is not just energy, it's energy and electrification now. When you ask what that means, it's getting the supply parts of the supply chain for the batteries, for the EVs, the EV charging, all these sorts of things that this government is now, after taking charging stations out of GO stations, as realized, whoops, we need to go in this policy. It wasn't Lecce that did that.
No.
But he's going to be. But Todd Smith as energy minister, I'm going to look at this from the other side of the equation, because this was basically 2 senior ministers switching seats on the front bench. Todd Smith, a lot of things were going on in energy, the Darlington refurbishment. These things, they're huge projects, and he's getting them by again. Very low key, no scandals, no problems going on. Electricity rates are high. Again, he's done a good job of keeping that file down. And I think now moving him into education, you've got to switch people out of education after all. The relationship with teachers and the teachers unions just becomes toxic.
And that was more complicated because he survived the slings and arrows of COVID too. I mean, let's not forget that was hugely amplified in terms of the hit he was taking.
So putting someone in there, I think Todd Smith, again, coming over from Energy, where he'd done a solid job. He's coming in, he's going to do education again with that same sort of, let's deal with it, let's keep it as low key as possible, which isn't always possible in education, but they're set up, the contracts are now set. So he's in a good position, and it's also unique, and I assume she's still in this position, but when I first met Todd Smith and his wife, she was a teacher, and I assume she still is. And I remember saying, does the caucus know you're a teacher? But just having that sensibility in the House is going to help him, I think, just, relate to teachers on a more one-to-one level.
Yeah, he'll be able to say, I know based on my own experience with, and for sure.
I've watched my wife at the table at night marking paper, whatever, all that stuff. Yeah. He's going to get that firsthand. Like, he's already got it. It's in there.
So all I could hear was, Scooby-Doo saying, ooh? When Steve Clark gets named as the House Leader, John. I mean, there's a picture of him on the CBC website, and it's like the thought bubbles. You want what?
The Premier, again, is really smart in kind of how all of this comes together. I'm taking the politic bench here for a moment. I mean, it's Thursday night, 5:00. Let's throw it out there. Friday, the TTC strike is going to be settled. Everybody's going to be talking about that. He's very loyal to Steve Clark. Steve Clark has got lots of connections with the municipality. He needs Steve Clark, but he's a formidable individual. You bring him back and say, see, look, I'm rehabilitating him. And then you take off for the summer. Smart move. No one cares. And certainly the electorate is not going to care. Look, I think the real issue here is about the Liberals. Marit Stiles has got traction in the House, and she's got her issues that she deals with, and now she's out there talking about the corruption, and she said that over and over and over again. This is what she focuses on. That's not going to have much traction with the public. I swear to you that unless Bonnie Crombie steps up and deals with healthcare as her wedge, she's going to get boxed in by the carbon tax. She'll be boxed in on the tax issue, and if she wants to say, you know what? I don't mind raising taxes for the wealthy people in this province or doing this in order to put fresh beds available that are not residences, but beds in place for long-term care, blah, 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 and stop closing emergency rooms and still using the term booze boondoggle instead of booze doggle. Like, if she gets it right, she's got a chance because she's the biggest loser out of all of this, all of it. So I just come back again from the pure politics. If I were her brain trust, and I don't know who it is after what happened from her election as leader, but I think it's always that great phrase, change the channel and turn up the volume. There's an opportunity here to own something. And what I would do, frankly, during the summer is I would own the booze versus beds issue. It gives her a sharp edge to get out there and to do it and to focus on it. And if they want to talk about raising taxes, turn it into an advantage and say, yeah, there are some who should be paying more. And we have that $9 billion deficit, and we need to be putting these things in place. And those guys are taking a summer break so they can have their 2-4 at the cottage. I'm right here 2-4 hours a day, doing stuff for my constituents. I mean, it's a 2-4 at the cottage or it's 24 hours a day. Take your pick. I don't know whether she's got it in her. I don't know whether or not the campaign team's got it in it. But all I know is I would take the time right now to sharpen my stick while the government is off and can't respond to anything else and make it my focus. And I think that, the focus now has to be that.
Well, I want to get back to Steve Clark, but before I do, I just want to say on Bonnie Crombie's news conference yesterday, the end of session newser, she was asked about, they're labeling you as the queen of the carbon tax. What do you? And she said, well, that's just, I've never done this and that, blah, blah, blah. I was a mayor. I was a blah, blah, blah. Doug Ford is the father of the carbon tax. Okay, yeah. That's your comeback. And then the other line she was test driving was, this Ford drives in reverse. And she kept saying that without then listing, a Greenbelt scandal or whatever else that you want to list at the government. These slogans, they just fell flat. They weren't there. But the one, Doug Ford is the father, just ignore the carbon tax. As you said, get to the hospital beds, get to the ER situation, whatever. but pick some other issue. Going back to Steve Clark, I think that, remember, he's the housing minister who fell on his sword when Premier Ford had to go out and flip-flop and say we went too far too fast on exempting these lands from the green belt. They went from worth tens of millions of dollars to $8.3 billion overnight. The government looked really bad there. Someone had to go, and it turned out to be Steve Clark as the housing minister. He's served his time in the penalty box. He's coming back now as government house leader, which, there's no ministry associated with it, but there's a good staff associated with it. And in addition, the government house leaders we often saw with Paul Calandra, who stays on as Minister of Housing, the government house leader answers for the Premier whenever the Premier doesn't feel like answering, which is 99% of the time. So this is a key position. Steve Clark's going to be the one standing up and answering when Doug Ford, shrugs this stuff off or isn't in the House to do it. So it's a heck of an important position. It's showing that Steve Clark is right back at the heart of Ford Nation.
All right, so let me just back up just for a second, and we're not going to back the bus up over Bonnie Crombie. You guys have done that sufficiently. She's under the bus already. But let me just suggest something here, because, what this tells me, and we all know, we have seen Bonnie Crombie in action and know her to be, feisty, the kind of, person that you do not want to fuck with, basically, politically. And so what's going on here in terms of the way you guys have analyzed this? I'll suggest two things. First is, I just don't think the Liberals have the actual people in the room, the ground game, based on their experience over the last 6 years around her. And you can't do this by yourself, no matter what. I mean, as good as she may be at that, one. Two, she's even more challenged now because Steve Clark's the House leader for the Tories. Now she has to contend with Doug Ford, Paul Calandra, and Steve Clark, all of whom can throw napalm bombs across the room, right? And pretty accurate with them. And they're slippery in terms of how they respond. And the personalities of those three guys, it's not even like good cop, bad cop. There's almost three legs on a stool. So they are propping up what is really foundationally, as John has already pointed out, this juggernaut across the way. So it's easy to kind of dismiss Crombie and say she's not doing her job. I think this says more about the Ontario Liberal Party, John.
I don't know. Again, I don't know Bonnie Crombie. All I know is the persona. I think it's really tough to be the head of a municipality and be a real powerhouse because you know your own backyard and you know your council and everybody's giving you a pat on the back and you can walk into a room and swing a big stick and go up to the Premier and say, how about this and that and everything else. And then you switch. I always remember her tearful goodbye to the council. It was like, oh my God, sorry, gotta leave. And then to walk into a place where crickets are there, like, you're out in the wilderness, it's some, some church basement, up in the Ottawa Valley, which is great to have a church supper. Man, oh man, they have a great supper up there. But you've gone from downtown Mississauga where you were building a big thing and you were taking over from Hazel McCallie and everybody was saluting you and kissing you and showing you what you are. And then all of a sudden you're in a room and people are going, who are you again? Like, what is your name? What's it? Oh, you're from the big city. I mean, what I see coming out of Bonnie Crombie at the moment is something very personal. I mean, the Conservatives effectively said it's all about Bonnie. All right. Like those of us who have met her know that there's a big persona there. And I think when you suddenly take the trappings away and it's just a big gulf of people who go, oh yeah, you're the Liberals, and can you imagine her going into a room and someone coming up to her, even if they're planted and saying, yeah, well, you Liberals are all alike. And what about Justin Trudeau? And he's got the carbon tax and being confronted with that and kind of going, oh, like I've never put up with that in Mississauga. I mean, I think there's a real shell shock that's here and she's still trying to find her ground. I think the Liberal Party is in real trouble because they haven't found a leader who can say, you know what, we're moving in this direction. Like damn the torpedoes, we're going to do this to take advantage of that kind of stuff. If it's all about you, then you never see what's all about your constituency. If it's all about you, you don't have a plan for everybody else. And I'm not sure she's there for that. I think if she'd been in the House, I think it would have been a different thing where she'd be up every day after the government on different issues, and she would have been test driving this. But I think she's out there alone. And
well, that's my point. I agree with you.
And
I agree with you.
But that's been, I mean, she's always been her own juggernaut in that way. She's always owned the room. Now the room owns her. And I think she's got the summer to figure this out. And that's why I said, I think she's got to pick an issue and draw deep on some personal reflections on what it was like to be in the healthcare system, maybe with a parent or somebody like that, and own an issue, not have the room own her.
Do the Liberals have a ground game? Dave, you mentioned it earlier. The issue is the ground game. Do they have one at this point? I mean, after 2 elections where they're basically annihilated, how do you get volunteers? How do you raise money? I mean, that makes it that much more difficult. Here we are halfway through the second majority term of a PC government. All the Ontario Liberals who had the smarts, who worked the back rooms, they left 6 years ago for Ottawa. They would join Justin Trudeau's government. And quite frankly, they're getting burned out of that position at this point in time. But the smart kids in the room, those are the best ones, the brightest and the best that come up with the Liberal ideas, that propelled them forward, that got McGuinty and Wynne elected. They're gone. So where are I think that's the biggest concern for them, right? How do you attract the best of the best to come to your party when your party has no official status, has very little standing in the legislature, and a leader who, was supposed to help at least, be the leader of the battleground 905, the key area you have to win Ontario elections. And she didn't run in Milton, as John pointed out, and she doesn't seem to be doing much outside of that area at all to get attention for the Liberal Party. So I think it's the lack of a ground game, and I just don't think they have the people in place that they need to be a serious contender as opposition or an alternate government.
But I think, there is an area of strength that the Liberals do have, and it's downtown Toronto, right? Like, if you're going to be, you can... Peterborough is not the bastion of Liberal opportunity. Come on, folks. I think, again, you've got to have strong people around somebody who's strong, who recognizes that they need contrarians in the room. They need people to sit them down and say, look, you may be good at one job, but I'm good at another job, and I can see where we need to go with this. And I just don't, I think this has been a very humbling experience for that persona. I really, really do. I think, however, that she needs to recognize that there are other people who know what the ground game is, and that it's got to start with your strength. So you know where she needs to be? She needs to be in Toronto. So you can go out in the hinterland for the next period of time and raise money and raise hopes and, get tickets sold or whatever you want to do. Sure, go have a church supper somewhere. But the reality is that this is where the Liberals live, right here in urban centers. And she needs to do that. And she needs to put the right people around her to start moving forward. Otherwise, she's going to get creamed.
Now, the only thing I will say before we leave is that you know what tweaked me when I heard the cabinet shuffle and the early dismissal of the House yesterday was that somehow Doug knew that we were going to have a TTC deal so that they could get away for the summer early. They weren't going to have to have an emergency session on Sunday. I'm telling you, I realize it's ludicrous, but the whole point is that they have avoided that. He's going to go now off, and they're done, and the TTC is all set.
When he came out yesterday, when Ford came out and said, no, we're not in position to legislate, we're not we're ready to go. I don't want to come back unless Olivia Chow asked me to do that. It said to me, wow, they really, so I had that, I'm with you. It's not plausible that he knew, but it sort of had that, Doug knew.
It was in the back of his head, for sure.
But look, it's always, it's like the high wire act at the circus or over Niagara Falls. Ooh, will they fall? Will they fall? Right down to the wire. These negotiations are such that the politicians or the people who are running the TTC or whatever are supposed to go to the public and saying, we're being fair and reasonable at the table. And, we're working hard to do this. And it's up to the other person to come out and say, we're nowhere close to a deal, even though they want 18% raise and the city's offering them 13. Wait until the deal comes out. It'll be rich. I agree. All that sort of stuff.
And what would be more costly, a strike or the actual settlement? That's going to be the question, right?
But then the other thing, too, is, it's Olivia Chow's call. Hey, Premier, sorry to bring you down from the cottage. Can you convene everybody on a Sunday afternoon and legislate them back? Oh, okay, Olivia, I love you. You love me. I'll be there in a moment for you. And put them in the House, have the NDP stand up and say, no way, we're not going to do that. And say, oh, okay, look, they're keeping us here for the summer.
They can save the hug circle for another time.
I'll just put it down to this. I think they did know that there was stuff. Of course, they knew what was on the table and what wasn't. I think it was closer to a deal days ago than it was at the last minute. But the reality is, this is how negotiations go nowadays, unless you kick it to an arbitrator. It'll be interesting to see what the framework contents are. But the other thing is, I don't know how the union can kick back a raise of at least 13%, because I know that was on the table. Over a few years.
I will remind you, and we had Brad Ross was on Now and Next this week with us. And, of course, Brad spent a good deal of time doing comms for TTC, and he was only on the job days when they actually went on strike in 2008. And he reminded me this week, they had a tentative deal with the TTC. It was a Friday night. They voted it down and went on strike at midnight, and people were stranded in downtown Toronto because there was no subway and there was no buses. So, I'm not to say that's going to happen, but it ain't over until they actually ratify it.
Yeah, but they actually then said, they were smart to do, say, oh, we're going to keep the trains running until 2 a.m. They understood all of this. Well, okay. Well, let's see the ratification. But I think, you know what? Everybody's gone to the cottage. No one wants to come back.
All right, guys. Well, we'll be back next week because there will be things to talk about, even though the legislature is off on its sojourn through until almost like freaking Halloween. But anyway, that'll do it for On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.